As was said last evening, when we gather together like this, inevitably a theme arises, and that which arises on this occasion is time and place. There was a man. He'd been in the monastery for many, many years under the tutelage of a great master. But in those years he'd seen many come and go and receive initiations, have transcendental experiences. But he had none of these. And one day he went to his master and he said, "Master, why have I not had any transcendental experiences, nor received any initiations? When will this occur for me?" And the master said, "One must wait for the right moment." Time went on, and the man followed his practices as he'd always done: mindfulness, chanting, meditation. But during those years of practice, there were still times when sitting in meditation, or chanting, or going about the tasks that were designated to him, his mind would wander, waft. But then, one day, the master came to him, and taking his hand, he guided him down the stairways of the monastery to a deep, deep location, far below, it seemed, those places where activity took place. And there he took him into a room. They'd passed through the entry door, but the room was empty. And the master led the seeker, the acolyte, over to the wall and sat him down in front. He said to him, "This is an aperture, a doorway that only opens every 300 years. You will need all your alert mindfulness to pass through." The seeker sat in front of the wall, intoning his mantras, bringing his mind to that state of alert mindfulness and concentration. But as he sat and the time passed, the chants, the mantras began to disappear, and his eyes began to close. But in an instant, he awoke to see a vast chasm closing in front of his eyes. Even though he jumped to try to pass through what remained of the opening, he was too late. The veil had already descended. And then there was a man who learned that in a far-off place there was a palace in which there lived a king who could answer a wish of one's greatest desire. This young man decided that he would embark on that journey that would take him to this far-off place so that he could have his greatest wish fulfilled. The journey was very hazardous. He had many adventures, passed through many difficulties, until he finally arrived at the place where the great palace loomed in front of his eyes. But as he approached and spoke to those who lived in the village outside the walls of the great palace, he was told that there was only one doorway, and it was never known when the king would come to stand behind that doorway, and the doorway would open so that one's wish could be asked and fulfilled. But the man had come a long way, gone through many trials to arrive here. So he stood at the doorway and waited. And he waited. And the days passed. And people began to notice him standing there with such vigilance and patience. And then some of the villagers would give him water or something to eat. But he remained standing in the doorway, waiting. The days, weeks, months passed, and there he stood. But during this time, not only the villagers who gave him some sustenance from time to time, they began to engage him in conversation. And then as the time passed, because he had a presence about him, patience, alertness, and they began to seek his advice, even ask for healing. And more people came. Day by day, crowds began to gather around him to seek what it was that they wished. Time went by so rapidly. And then one day, behind him, he heard a great groaning, creaking, and then the sounds of a key being turned and bolts being opened. And as he turned, he saw the great door opening in front of him. But then he turned, and there were the crowds of people awaiting his guidance, his listening, his words of advice, his touch. And as he greeted them, the creaking and groaning of the great door, as it closed behind him. And then there was that fisherman, humble, simple. He spent his life casting his net into the ocean. And whatever it was that was in his nets, he shared with people who came to him. He was considered to be an enlightened man, a teacher, humble though he was. And every day he gutted the fish that had been caught and passed them to those who came and the needy, keeping just a few fish heads for himself to make a little soup. Day after day, many came for his wisdom, his teachings. And then one day, a certain merchant who had been with him for some years came, and after giving greetings, told the fisherman that he was going to the great city of Bokhara to trade. "Oh," said the fisherman, "my teacher, the great Sufi mystic Bayazid, lives in that city of Bokhara. Please, when you visit there, would you call on him and give him my greetings, my salutations, and ask him, does he have a word of advice for me?" The merchant went off on that journey, and when he came to the great city of Bokhara, he sought out the mystic Bayazid and found him living in a great house, in great luxury, servants, people waiting on him, wealth in abundance. And the merchant, being brought into the presence of the great mystic, after his own salutations, passed on the greetings of his own teacher and master, the fisherman. And then he asked, "Do you have advice for my teacher?" And the great Bayazid said, "Tell your teacher that he is still too worldly." Now the merchant was greatly affronted by this. How could this man, sitting in such luxury, speak this of his own humble, simple master? When he returned to his town and presented himself to the fisherman asked, "Did you visit my great teacher? And what did he say to you?" The merchant was very reluctant to pass on the words that had been said, but the fisherman pressed him. And when these words were spoken, Bayazid said that you were still too worldly. Tears began to roll down the cheeks of the fisherman, and he said, "Yes, sometimes there is my wish that I could eat a whole fish." What is the difference or the similarity in your understanding between these three simple stories.